I ain't going there after this experience. Oh, right, yeah. Pull it over. Yeah. It's a little too functional. Get a little extra help in here. Yep. Got your whole thing. That was all the whole thing. Lloyd Jones. Oh, you talking about Lloyd Jones? What about in his career? Huh? His last couple matches. He retired? Yeah. He got enough money for the last season. He got knocked out. No. Like, he was trying to copy his head well. This is not right. Yeah. This would have been a problem. This one's mine. It would have been an issue. Like this, you think? It would have been an issue. I took it home. Yeah, email. Like pockets. Oh, yeah. Wait. Huh? Wait. McDonald's, I used to get sausage. I remember. So, today when I ordered it, so spicy. Oh yeah. You can try that. It's just different. It's like pepper in the baked cheese. They don't give you the real cheese. It's like the cheese. So I had it and I was like, I want to do that again. I saw it at the ice coffee. Yeah. One and done. It's on my screensaver, right? Yes. You want me to send it to you? No. Send it to Drew. What? Nothing. Get with the program. See you in 2 hours.
Good morning. We're back in session. I'm Jennifer Homendy, and I'm honored to serve as chairwoman of the National Transportation Safety Board and chair of this Board of Inquiry. This is day 3. We probably should not mention that we have air conditioning, but I'm thankful for that and for the staff for working on it. This is day 3, the final day of our investigative hearing of the fatal midair collision involving a Sikorsky UH-60 Lima operated by the U.S. Army under the call sign PAT-25 and PSA Airlines Flight 5342, a CRJ700, that occurred over the Potomac River near Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport at about 8:48 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on January 29, 2025. The first 2 days of this hearing focused on the accident helicopter's air data systems and altimeters, the DCA Class B airspace and helicopter routes, and training, guidance, and procedures applicable to DCA air traffic control. You can view those proceedings on our YouTube channel. Today I'm joined by my fellow board members, Member Michael Graham and Member Todd Inman. Together we comprise the Board of Inquiry for this investigative hearing, the notice for which was published in the Federal Register on July 11th, 2025. I now recognize Dr. Dan Bauer, our hearing officer.
Thank you, Chairwoman Homendy. We will now share important safety information for those here in person. Please play the video.
Hello and welcome to the NTSB boardroom. Before we get started with today's meeting, I'd like to quickly walk you through our emergency procedures. First things first, please take a moment to silence your phones or other electronic devices. If you need the restrooms, they're just outside the boardroom on the left side of the lobby. Now, in case of an emergency, here's what you need to know. If someone experiences a medical emergency, our on-site Federal Protective Service officers are trained to respond. They'll call 911, perform CPR if needed, and use the automated external defibrillator device mounted in the lobby between the boardroom exit doors. They're also trained to provide first aid. There's a first aid kit at the security desk in the lobby. If we're asked to shelter in place, like during severe weather or a security incident, please stay seated and listen for instructions. Our security team will manage the situation and let us know when it's safe to leave. If the fire alarm sounds, please follow NTSB staff to the nearest exit. There are 2 main options. You can exit via the stairs next to the stage, or you can exit the same way you came in through the lobby. Please walk, don't run. Once outside, you'll be directed to an assembly area. Stay there until we're clear to come back inside. If there's a small fire, our security officers are trained to respond using one of the fire extinguishers. You'll find them in 3 locations: by the stairwells on either side of the stage at the front of the boardroom, mounted on the wall in the back of the boardroom, and near the security area in the lobby. For anyone who needs an accessible evacuation route, you can use the door to the left side of the lobby, which leads into the parking garage. From there, turn right and follow the walkway to the street level. NTSB staff will be available to assist anyone who needs help. And finally, safety is everyone's responsibility. If you see anything that seems off or concerning, please let a staff member or security officer know right away. Thank you for helping us maintain a safe and secure space.
All right.
Chairwoman Homendy, that completes my remarks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bauer. And thank you, Sherry, for that excellent video. Next to Dan in the front row, I want to introduce the NTSB staff. Is Mr. Bryce Banning, our investigator in charge for this investigation, or the IIC. Dr. Jana Price, Transportation Safety. Oh, I thought that's the order I have in here. Is there a new order? Oh, that's panel 5. Great. Hold. we're going to go ahead and let the panel all introduce themselves while I find panel 4 and get on the right panel and drink my Starbucks coffee.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Captain Rocky Sohn. I'm an aviation safety investigator for air carrier operations.
I'm John Flynn, systems investigator.
I'm William Bramble. I'm a National Resource Specialist for Human Performance.
Captain Van McKinney, Aerospace Engineer, Helicopters.
I'm Sarah Lewis, Air Traffic Control Investigator.
Marie Muller, Vehicle Performance Investigator.
Michael Portman, Aerospace Engineer, Vehicle Recorders.
Catherine Wilson, Human Performance.
Brian Soper, Lead Air Traffic Investigator.
Jihoon Shin, Helicopter Engineer.
I'm Brian Fuchs, Materials Engineer, and I will be running the audio-visual today.
Good morning. I'm Anthony Land, Transportation Safety Specialist. I'm running the timer today.
Good morning. Dr. Jana Price, Transportation Safety Specialist.
Lauren Groff, Chief Data Scientist.
Sean Payne, Branch Chief Vehicle Recorders Division.
Tim LeBaron, Director of Aviation Safety.
Thank you. Jana, you got introduced twice. She'll be in the front row next. So behind me is Mr. Daniel Baranovsky. He'll provide legal support throughout the investigative hearing. And for those in the room, several representatives from our Transportation Disaster Assistance Division are here to provide support throughout the proceedings today. Can TDA please stand up? We have folks there all around. Thank you very much. And once again, volunteer mental health clinicians from the American Red Cross can provide emotional support for anyone attending. I'd like to thank the Red Cross for being here throughout this hearing and certainly throughout all our investigative work, whether it's this investigation or others. Turning to the parties to the hearing, as I call the name of each party, I ask the designated spokesperson to identify themselves and then introduce others at their table. We'll start with Airline Pilots Association.
Good morning. I'm Captain Daniel Mullen Alpa, spokesperson and party coordinator. With me today, Chris Heck. Next to him, Captain Matt Gorshey, Shea Bohm across the table, and we have Captain Mike Palazzolo, Captain Russell Page.
Federal Aviation Administration.
Good morning, Chairwoman. My name is Todd Gentry. I'm the agency spokesperson for the hearing today. Beside me is Patrick Lush, the agency's lead investigator and party coordinator. We have two SMEs with us today. We have Alex Rodriguez and Andy Shaw for the first panel. Hearing Heidi Kemner is the Federal Aviation hearing officer, and in front of me is Chris Stevenson, our counsel.
Thank you so much, FAA. National Air Traffic Controllers Association.
Good morning, Chairwoman. John Murdoch. I'm the party spokesman for NACA today. I'm the safety representative. Across the table from me is Seth Myers, party coordinator. To his left is Cher Oxenberg, safety rep. To her left is Sandra Fulmer, safety rep. And to my right, Karina Marinas, air safety investigator. And to her right is Natalie Moffett, NACA attorney.
Thank you very much. PSA Airlines.
Good morning, ma'am. My name is Darren Hall. I'm the Vice President of Safety, Security, and Development for PSA. At the end of the table, we have our Director of Operations, Captain Lucas Bowden, and beside me is our legal counsel, Benjamin Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Sikorsky.
Good morning, ma'am. I'm Dave Blair, the Chief Pilot for Safety with Sikorsky. Behind me is Jill Browning, our Chief Air Safety Investigator. To my right is Paul Bowles, our Chief Counsel. To my other right again is Kyle DeLong, our Director for Aviation Safety and Airworthiness, and Dan Cooper, who you met, our Senior Technical Fellow.
Wonderful. And the U.S. Army.
Good morning, Chair. I'm Brigadier General Matt Brayman. I'm the party spokesman. And with me is Colonel Matt Parker, our Army Party Coordinator, Colonel Noah Fontenez, our legal counsel, Colonel Kevin Easter, the Deputy Director of Aviation. We've got CBF5, Bob Phillips, the Army's Standardization Officer, and Mr. David George, Technical Lead for Assured Airspace Access Systems.
Thank you, and thank you all for your participation in the proceedings. To ensure all questions were answered yesterday, we shifted panel 4 to today, so we all appreciate everyone's flexibility. And we'll begin on panel 4 in just a few moments with collision avoidance technology. Later today, we'll move to panel 5, which will address safety data and safety management systems at the various organizations. We'll break for lunch and throughout as needed, so please remain flexible. And we'll follow the same process for both panels. Dr. Bauer will introduce the topics to be addressed, as well as the technical panel members and witnesses. I'll then swear in the witnesses who will be questioned in the following order. First by the NTSB technical panel, next by the parties to the hearing, and finally by the Board of Inquiry. And then on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank the many witnesses testifying today, many of which have been here throughout the entire proceedings. So thank you so much for your work and for being here and for your support of aviation safety. And again, just a reminder that we ask all witnesses to be present until we adjourn, unless you've coordinated that in advance with the hearing officer, who will coordinate with me. And next, the hearing officer will describe the exhibits. Dr. Bauer.
Thank you, Chairwoman Hamady. Exhibits for this hearing include reports produced by NTSB investigative staff, videos, and other documents submitted by the technical panel members, witnesses, and parties to support the testimony and questions you will hear today. The exhibits for this hearing are in the docket. The docket number is SA-544. That's Sierra Alpha 544. The NTSB is authorized by statute to disclose information to carry out its mission, but we protect confidentiality and proprietary information to the extent possible. As such, the exhibits contain redactions. These are the result of negotiations between the parties and the NTSB regarding the disclosure of information claimed to be personally identifiable, security sensitive, or proprietary in nature. Though redacted, the exhibits contain sufficient information so that the members of the public can refer to them during the hearing and throughout the NTSB investigation. The exhibits entered into the record and any presentations, along with other records of the investigation, become part of the NTSB public docket and are available via the NTSB website, ntsb.gov. The public docket opened Wednesday morning. Party spokespersons and witnesses have been provided electronic copies of the public docket containing the exhibits identified above. The docket is located on the investigation page, which you can access in one of two ways: by visiting ntsb.gov, or if you've joined us in person, you can scan the QR code on the hearing agenda. On the investigation page, you will find the link to the public docket on the right-hand side, just below the map. A transcript of the testimony taken during the hearing will be prepared and entered into the docket as soon as possible. In addition, Mr. Baranovsky will keep a list of any documents admitted during the hearing that are not currently exhibits in the NTSB public docket. These documents will be submitted after the hearing and entered into the docket. As a reminder, if a party to the hearing has a new exhibit to propose in accordance with 49 CFR Section 845.9, it will not be admitted unless Chairwoman determines that good cause has been shown. Chairwoman Hamady, this concludes my remarks.
Thank you very much. We're ready to begin panel 4, Dr. Bauer. So please review the panel topics and introduce the technical panel and witnesses.
Thank you. Panel 4 will provide an overview of collision avoidance technology. We will address the following topics: Description of collision avoidance technology. FAA requirements for collision avoidance technology for Class B airspace. Difference between the Traffic Alert and Collision Avoidance System, known as TCAS, and Airborne Collision Avoidance System, known as ACAS. Difference between an ACAS and NTSB Traffic Advisory System, or known as ATAS. Pilot compliance rate with TCAS resolution advisories, including the current rate and what can be done to improve compliance, and reduction in nuisance traffic alerts and resolution advisories to improve the compliance rate. Description of TCAS version 7.0 and its inhibits, including resolution advisory inhibits and oral alert inhibits. A description of what collision avoidance technology the CRJ had on board to include TCAS configuration on the CRJ, the traffic display to the CRJ pilots, and any limitations. A description of the Army philosophy of collision avoidance technology, including Army use of foreflight for traffic awareness. A description of the results of TCAS and ACAS simulations using the geometry of this accident. Reduction of resolution advisory threshold and the effect that would have on operations in TCAS resolution advisory compliance. Evolution of ACAS and safety payback or benefit. ACAS XR for helicopters and ACAS XR standards. Combinations of technology solutions to mitigate the risk of future midair collisions. And NTSB in and out, the effect on aircraft onboard collision avoidance technology and operations. The NTSB technical panel, starting on my right after Mr. Banning, is composed of Captain Rocky Stone, an aviation accident investigator for air carrier operations. Mr. John Flynn, aerospace engineer, systems. Dr. William Bramble, a national resource specialist in human performance. Captain Van McKinney, aerospace engineer for helicopters. And Mr. Chihoon Shin, an aerospace engineer for helicopters, who is seated behind Captain McKinney. Witnesses for this panel are composed of the following individuals. From my left, nearest the board members. In the front row, we have Dr. Steve Kasner, an aviation human factors researcher and author and retired NASA Ames employee. Dr. Wes Olson, the leader of the Transportation Safety and Resilience Group at MIT Lincoln Laboratory. Mr. Neil Suchi, a TCAS manager with the Federal Aviation Administration. Mr. Matt Haskin, with the FAA certification for avionics, communications, and surveillance with the Federal Aviation Administration. Mr. Michael Grease, the Senior Director for Certification and Airworthiness with Collins Aerospace, and Dr. Fabrice Kunze, the President of the Avidyne Corporation. In the second row, from left to right, we have Captain David Surridge, the Director of Air Traffic Management with American Airlines. Next is Captain Grant Clow, the Assistant Director for Flight Ops Tech with PSA Airlines. Next, Chief Warrant Officer David Van Vechten, standardization instructor pilot with the Army Aviation Brigade, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Flanagan, product manager for Assured Aerospace Access Systems with the U.S. Army, and Ms. Stacy Rowland, the Director of Systems Engineering with Sage Tech. Chairwoman Hamidi, these witnesses have been pre-qualified and their respective experience and qualifications appear in the docket as exhibits. This concludes my remarks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bauer. I'll now ask the witnesses to please stand and raise your right hand. Please answer by saying, I do. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you'll give in this hearing will be the truth? Thank you. You may be seated. As a reminder to the witnesses, you'll remain under oath until the conclusion of the hearing. We ask that you answer the questions factually and avoid analysis. If you have any questions about if a question would be asking for analysis, please feel free to direct the question to me or the hearing officer. Finally, please push your microphone button to talk and then push it again when you're done. All right, I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Bauer, and the technical panel.
Thank you. We'll start with Captain Stone.
Thank you, Dr. Bauer. We're actually going to, human performance plays a central role in everything that we do in collision avoidance and aviation, so we're actually going to start our questions with Dr. William Bramble talking about human performance issues.
Thanks, Captain Stone. Actually, before I begin with our predetermined line of questioning today, I just wanted to follow up on something yesterday that was discussed with you, Mr. Van Vechten. The term vertigo came up, and I wanted to point out that that term is sometimes colloquially used to refer to the phenomenon of spatial disorientation, which is an inaccurate perception of attitude or trajectory. Such experiences are minor and transitory usually, but they're unfortunately common due to the fact that human senses did not evolve to correctly interpret the forces of flight. A 2002 U.S. Air Force survey found that 26.9% of pilots had experienced spatial disorientation in the month before the survey, and 58% had experienced it in the previous 6 months. And a 1975 study of naval helicopter pilots found that 56% had experienced one or more episodes of severe disorientation in flight. Mr. Van Vechten, have you ever experienced misleading sensations when maneuvering at night under NVGs?
Yes, I have.
How do you handle that when it occurs?
It's essential to cross-check your instruments and reference your primary would be your attitude indicator. Now, the only time this is really prevalent is when you don't have a visible horizon. Once spatial disorientation occurs, once you have the horizon, it almost immediately goes away for most pilots. And it's highly unlikely that both pilots would be spatially disoriented at the same time. So you can also transfer the controls to the other pilot, and most likely they are not spatially disoriented.
How are you supposed to communicate with your fellow pilot when that happens?
We have since changed our technique and procedures. There's a new term called uncaged, but prior to that, you would announce that you are spatially disoriented. Now, I need to mention that there are 3 different types of spatial disorientation. The first is recognized, where I understand something's not right. Maybe I feel like I'm spinning or I'm getting what's called the leans. That's recognized. Unrecognized is it's happening and I don't realize it, and then that could lead to incapacitating. The most dangerous would be unrecognized spatial disorientation because you don't know it's happening. So, I'm sorry, going back to your original question again, I wanted to explain those 3. What was your original question?
How are you supposed to communicate?
Oh.
And I think you did.
Sorry, yes.
Does that usually resolve if you follow the protocols?
Yes, it should, because like I stated, it's highly unlikely that both pilots would be spatially disoriented at the same time. And it's usually unlikely to occur with a visible horizon. So that usually corrects the situation if you announce it and then transfer the controls.
Okay. All right, turning to Dr. Kasner.
Dr. Bramble, if you're going to raise that, can you yield for a second to me?
Sure.
Okay. Mr. Van Vechten, I just want to, along those lines of question, because Dr. Bramble raised it, at the time of the midair collision, there was a pilot flying in the left seat. That individual was flying at the time of the accident, correct?
Correct.
At the time of the dizzy comment, which pilot was flying? Do you know?
I'm trying to think back to the transcripts. I just went over this last night. It should have been the pilot. The pilot was, the instructor pilot was flying the aircraft.
That's correct.
Yeah.
The pilot instructor was flying for 10 minutes from 1943 to 1953-39, which was confirmed by our recorders specialists.
And the reason it's a little confusing is because PI is the duty symbol we log, which is, but it's co-pilot.
Yeah.
I know. And then the pilot in command was the instructor pilot, and that's PC.
Is it unusual that a pilot who would not be flying would also experience dizziness because they're not flying?
That's actually more common. So when I'm on the controls, like I stated yesterday, like demonstrating combat maneuvering flight or perform evasive maneuvers, several times I've had a co-pilot or pilot become sick and nauseated because of the maneuvers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van Vechten. Back to you, Dr. Bramble.
Thanks. Those were some very helpful clarifications. Okay, Dr. Kasner, we're going to kick this off by talking about see and avoid, which has been discussed from the standpoint of air traffic management quite a bit over the last 2 days. But we haven't talked about the human factors of it that extensively. Can you describe the challenges of see and avoid from a pilot standpoint?
Certainly, as I pointed out the other day.
If you could just come a little closer to the mic.
Certainly. Our range of vision is actually quite narrow, as we talked about the other day, about 3 degrees. In a complex airspace, you have many directions you got to look in, up, down, and 180 degrees, maybe even 360 degrees. So it's a lot of real estate to cover with one narrow beam of attention.
Okay, and what does human factors research say about how good pilots are at detecting other airborne traffic that they aren't necessarily expecting to see?
Okay, that's highly dependent on how much information we're provided about where the potential threats could be. There's a classic study done about 35 years ago that asked pilots to just operate normally and were given no heads up at all about any intruder aircraft that might come their way. And what they found was pilots spotted just a little more than half of those intruder aircraft. And to be clear, they missed almost half of those, given no clues, given no heads up that anything was coming their way.
Wow. Why is it so hard to notice an intruder target?
Again, there's so many things to look at when flying an aircraft. You have the internal scene, instruments, the external scene, many things to think about. There's just a lot going on. And again, we have that ability to look at and think about one thing at a time.
What are the factors that attract our focal attention to an object in the environment typically?
Okay, that's where peripheral vision comes in. Motion is a very big cue for us. Everyone is familiar with the idea. They see something flickering or jittering in their periphery, it grabs our attention. We see it detected quite well.
Okay, when 2 aircraft are on a collision course flying a relatively steady heading, the opposite target will appear to be relatively stationary in the pilot's visual field. How would that impact the ability to detect the target?
That's going to make it very difficult. When something is approaching from the side, say a 90-degree angle, you get a lot of movement in your field of vision. When something is coming at you directly, it just doesn't seem to move very much, and that's a tough thing to see.
Mr. Fuchs, can you put up figure 30, please, from 2 Hilo A? Okay, so we reviewed some of the limitations of NVGs yesterday. Monochrome, this is the white phosphor version, so lack of color. How might that be a challenge in detecting airborne traffic?
Well, there are many challenges there. First of all, there's no color. So any aircraft that is oriented at an angle toward me, I'm not going to be able to see their navigation lights, the red and green navigation lights, which could help me understand how they're oriented and which direction they're coming. Also here, it makes it difficult to know what is what we were calling cultural lights, stars, and aircraft. We just discussed that an aircraft coming at you does not appear to move in the visual field. Well, neither does a star and neither does a building. So this makes it very, very much a challenge.
Okay. Mr. Van Vechten, those aircraft shown on the horizon in this image are about 4 or 5 miles away. Do they look any different than ground lights? Can you, in real life, can you make out the fuselages of those aircraft, or do they just appear as point lights?
Those just appear as point lights. It's very difficult to tell. It could be on a pole in the distance, could be a light. And because I'm so far away, I wouldn't have any motion like you stated, so I can't tell if it's moving. So that would be difficult to determine.
Okay. Can we pull up figure 29? Okay, so this is about a mile away. These are images taken from the green and the white NVGs. The acuity is reduced by the use of NVGs, so you see they look a little bit blurry. It's about 20/40 for the green, 20/25 for the white. Can you typically make out the shape of the aircraft at this distance?
No, I cannot.
Okay. How does that impact your ability to differentiate airborne targets from ground lights?
We have to use scanning and viewing with the naked eye, so continuously moving your head to try to get some type of relative motion to the object that you're looking at to determine if it's moving or if it's stationary, and then looking with the naked eye to possibly see an anti-collision light, or like the doctor stated, the red or green lights. So in aviation, we have a term, right on red return. So if you're looking at an aircraft and you see a red light on the right side, that means it's returning towards you, and that's how we use the red and the green position lights to determine the track of the aircraft.
But how do you do that when you're looking through the monochrome NVGs?
You have to look with the naked eye to try to see the red and green lights.
Do you usually flip the goggles up or tilt your head? Or?
No, you look side to side or look underneath the goggles.
Okay. Okay, so given the difficulty of detecting apparently motionless targets in the visual field, what is the role of expectancy, Dr. Kasner, in driving attention when operating in a dynamic environment and performing multiple tasks?
Well, here's where the idea of airport orientation, airspace orientation comes into play. If I have a familiarization with traffic patterns there, I'm going to know to direct my attention a little extra in those directions, more than I scan anywhere else. So knowing where to look, that is the key.
Okay, and what drives that knowing where to look?
Experience is one terrific source of that information, and if you don't have that, and the airspace is sufficiently complex, the airport, sometimes they'll prepare an airport qualification chart, and that's the FAA's opportunity to relate that information to the crew. Let me know where the problem areas are.
Okay. Is it fair to say that you need an accurate mental model of traffic patterns and movements to be able to anticipate the movement of airborne targets?
That's essential.
Okay. Do psychologists have a term for mistaking unusual patterns in the environment for more common patterns?
Well, loosely referred to as expectation bias, that if you're primed to be ready to see something and something pops up, you have a tendency to categorize it
according to your expectation.
When does that tend to occur? When do people fall into that trap?
Well, it's when you, how do I phrase this? When the same thing happens over and over, you just encounter that so many times, gather so much experience with it, it tends to just sell itself to you that you're just so primed each time to expect that.
Is it fair to say that if you either don't receive information about what makes this event unusual or you forget that information, that you're more likely to revert to the more common expectation?
That can be the case, yes.
Okay. All right, can we pull up 3G, page 57, Brian? So the FAA's PDARS study indicated that 4 to 7% of fixed-wing arrivals landed runway 33 when DCA was in a north configuration in 2024, and about 93% landed runway 1. How would this pattern affect crew expectations about where to scan for traffic if they either did not hear or forgot that traffic was landing runway 33?
Well, it would seem to make it more challenging, and I would want to have all the information I could get if I was asked to do something unusual or something new.
Okay. Continuing with the discussion about expectations, I'm going to read some quotes from 3 12th Aviation Battalion pilots. We asked about their understanding of the protection provided by DC helicopter routes. A Chief Warrant Officer 2 said, maybe I just have too much trust in like what's printed in front of me because I generally think that this is going to keep us safe. So if there's a traffic that's landing and Tower has them and we're on Route 4, the way I understand it is like we should be fine. It shouldn't be an issue. Another Chief Warrant Officer 2 said, was asked, would it be your assumption that if you stayed below the max altitude on Route 4 that you'd be safe from arriving traffic on 3-3? His answer was, yeah, that's why the routes are published, 200 feet and below. So you imagine that it's going to separate you from other traffic. A third pilot, who's actually the commander of the 12th Aviation Battalion, was asked, was it your understanding that if you stayed below the max altitude on Route 4 next to DC that you'd be safe from arriving commercial traffic? The commander answered,
gentleman that was speaking was down in the middle table. He's up on the top table, on the front row. This guy is up on the front row. Okay. You heard him? Huh? Thank you. I never heard should have just a roll with it. Should have just a tape. You're at church. Three of us sitting just ignoring. We hear him. And 2 minutes later, hear him again. Then it's one time. Everybody almost heard him. It's like people over there, they look at that, it's like, it ain't me. It was probably like me a minute ago. But building or something, you know, I get into somewhere else. Right moving. Later. I don't even call watch anyway. I get at least We're still in standby mode.
Test.
Test 1, 2.
Test, test.
Test 1 2 test 1 2 test 1 2.
That's right. was at the meeting and tonight, sitting behind us. That's where I was sitting. Yeah.
We'll begin again in 3 minutes. You have 3 minutes. Back to you, Dr. Bramble.
Okay, thank you very much. As I was saying, I was recounting some statements from the interviews from 3 pilots from the 12th Aviation Battalion, and the last that I was reading was a statement from the commander, who was asked, was it your understanding that if you stayed below the max altitude on Route 4 next to DCA, that you would be safe from arriving commercial traffic? And the commander said, that's what the route altitudes are meant to do, to deconflict that traffic. Yes, sir. Dr. Kasner, how might these assumptions that we now know to be incorrect impact pilot scanning when traveling down Route 4?
I think it would provide a sense of safety and security there, and most likely result in a more relaxed scan, lesser scanning.
Okay, Mr. Van Vechten, how long did you fly UH-60s out of Davison Army Airfield?
From July of 2020 to July of 2024.
Okay, so about 4 years. How many times would you estimate you traversed helicopter Route 4?
Hundreds.
And how many times did you encounter airline traffic landing runway 33?
Less than 10.
Okay. You said yesterday that you were not intimately familiar with the approach path for runway 33 that airliners used. Is that correct?
That's correct.
If you were traveling south on Route 4, how would you know where to look for traffic landing 33?
You'd have to look at the approach end of the runway and then trace backwards to where you believe the aircraft would be coming from.
Okay, so you would extend sort of the center line of runway 33 imaginarily into the
That's a better,
space.
more technical way of saying it.
Okay. All right. Were you aware that it was a circling approach?
33 is a circling only?
Mm-hmm.
I was not aware of that.
Okay. And I think you mentioned something about an ILS, maybe an assumption that there was an ILS to 33?
I just assumed most, well, either ILS or GPS, I would assume, would be the most approaches that the fixed wing would be doing.
Okay.
Which would imply a straight-in approach.
Okay. Dr. Kasner, given some of the limitations that we've discussed, foresee and avoid, visual scanning, how can we best support pilots in seeing and avoiding other airborne traffic so they know where and when to monitor?
I would say to start out with a thorough familiarization with the airspace, just this sort of thing that we're discussing here. If there are other approaches, alternative approaches in use, especially circling approaches, have everyone know about that, all types of aircraft. Basically, being intimately familiar with the way business is done in that piece of airspace.
Okay. So you're talking about expectancy and knowing where and when to look by having an accurate mental model of what's going on.
Absolutely.
All right. So an additional redundant layer of protection might involve technological solutions. What is the role of collision avoidance technology?
Okay, that's the second sort of information that we can supply to the see and avoid process, where you're keeping a general vigilance for traffic, but then there happens to be a particular aircraft that you need to look at. So this is a way of providing information about where to look, what direction, what altitude to look, and it's known to be highly effective.
Okay, so there are different types of technologies for supporting traffic awareness. There are cockpit displays of traffic information, and there are traffic alerting systems, some of which provide merely advisory information, some of which provide directive guidance. Can you walk us through those different kinds of technologies and what purpose they serve?
Well, they all essentially inform the visual search process in the same way. Even the controller's advisory that you have traffic at, say, 1 o'clock, 500 above, that tells you where to point your eyes. Good evidence that you can portray that on a cockpit display. Pilots can look down at it and gather the same sort of information, project that flat display in the cockpit into the real world scene. And again, it's very effective. It speeds up the target acquisition on the part of the pilot.
So it aids in knowing where to look for a target?
Greatly so.
Okay. Even if you have maybe a little bit less than ideal amount of information about where that target should be, such as a vague communication from air traffic control?
Yeah, certainly. It literally tells you where to point your eyes.
Okay. Tell me about traffic alerting and what function that serves.
I guess I don't understand. A verbal alert, are we talking about?
So, yeah, many of these traffic displays have both oral and visual alerts that will warn a pilot about traffic that could be a potential threat. From a cognitive standpoint or a perceptual standpoint, what is the purpose of providing those alerts?
Oh, once again, just tell you how to limit your search to the vicinity of the target. It literally tells you where to point that narrow visual flashlight beam that we all have. And we know there's a tremendous speed up associated with that when we do have the information.
Is it fair to say that if you are busy performing other aviation-related tasks and you do not detect a potentially threatening target, that an oral alert could draw your attention to the display and indicate to you a threat that you need to search for?
Absolutely. That's its intended purpose.
Okay, and how much more quickly might you find a target if you are provided this type of technology as opposed to just looking for something unaided?
The studies out there generally find about an 8-to-1 speed up. So imagine a target that I would take 8 seconds to find, completely unaided. Using a display like this or an alert like this, I can generally find that in 1 second. Or if it would require 16 seconds, I can now maybe see it in 2 seconds. It's amazing.
That is a massive effect. Last question, Dr. Kasner, just wrapping up. You reviewed the docket for this accident investigation extensively. And from a human factors standpoint, do you see any design vulnerabilities in the system as a whole for preventing collisions between helicopters and fixed-wing traffic near DCA?
Yeah, again, I'd start with the two sorts of information that I gave the opinion that really aid visual search is airspace familiarity. That's huge. Know exactly where the aircraft are. And then, of course, secondly, active use to the extent possible, collision avoidance systems.
Thank you very much. I'll pass the questioning on to Captain Stone.
Thank you, Dr. Bramble. I'm going to follow up Dr. Kastner with one more question. You talked about the importance of see and avoid or having situational awareness of where the traffic is to help you acquire the see and avoid. Can you give a comment on the effectiveness of a collision avoidance system, which doesn't rely on see and avoid at all? It provides guidance to the pilot on how to avoid a midair collision. So how would you contrast the effectiveness of a system like that versus see and avoid?
So just to clarify, are we talking about a resolution advisory or a traffic advisory?
A resolution advisory.
Okay, well, that's a very different thing. With a traffic advisory, even if you're looking for traffic on a display, it's still see and avoid. You're just seeing it somewhere else. But a resolution advisory, yeah, incredibly effective if it's trained properly. We know that when you get a resolution advisory, and for that to be effective, you need to turn your brain off. You need to not wonder why. You just do it, and that's a difficult thing.
Very, very well said. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to change subjects a little bit. I'm going to go to Dr. Kunze to talk about ADSB, automatic dependent surveillance broadcast. And you know, we've thrown that term around a lot over the last couple days. And could you just give us a layman's explanation of what is ADSB, out and in?
Yeah, I'll do my best. Automatic dependent surveillance broadcast, as you said, stands for, ADSB stands for those words. Every one of those words is actually important. It is automatic in the sense that it automatically broadcasts information. That is different than some of the other technologies out there where we rely on the interrogation from a radar on the ground, where then a transponder on board the aircraft replies, and that's how the location of aircraft is being measured. It is dependent because it requires the presence of a high accuracy navigation system. Usually this is a GPS system, but it doesn't have to be. What makes ADSB dependent is that we need that information to populate the fields in the message of ADSB. So if I broadcast my latitude and longitude, my ADSB system doesn't know my latitude and my longitude. I have to get that from somewhere else. And so therefore the system is dependent. It is surveillance. In other words, it isn't engine data. It isn't flight vehicle information system data. It is surveillance data. So latitude, longitude, altitude, velocities, aircraft information from a size and type perspective, flight ID, which is very helpful when you try to identify a particular aircraft. If air traffic control calls out, American Airlines, whatever number, you actually can now identify what aircraft that is being displayed and called out to you. And then lastly, broadcast, because it is broadcasting out that information. We often differentiate between ADSB out and ADSB in. ADSB out is the action of broadcasting this information from an aircraft. ADSB in is the action of then receiving that information on board my own aircraft from anyone else who might be broadcasting it. Now, there's a couple of important points to make here is when we say ADSB in, for example, just receiving the information is only the first step. What's more important is what we do with that data once we have it on the aircraft. We talked about the ability to display it to the pilot for situation awareness. We can use it for issuing alerts. We can use it to improve separation in the air. We can aid air traffic control functions. Yesterday we talked about flow-based, time-based flow management. We can improve spacing between aircraft. And it's really that ability, those applications that we wrap around that data that represents the fundamental transformation opportunity that we have with the air transportation system. Another thing to highlight here is ADSB in is only as good as your ADSB out equipage level. So if people aren't broadcasting, ADSB in isn't very useful. So it really matters that everybody else broadcasts ADSB out messages. And the last thing I highlight, in the United States we have two frequencies for ADSB. One is called Universal Access Transceiver, or UAT, and the other one is 1090 Extended Squitter, 1090 ES for short. That unfortunately introduces some complexity in the system. So if I am broadcasting on UAT, someone with a 1090 ES system cannot hear my broadcasts and vice versa. And so there are some systems on the ground that help with the translation of that, but that is system complexity that makes it difficult for some aircraft to hear others and vice versa.
Thank you. And I'm going to go back to the point you made just your second point ago, and that was it's critical how much equipage there is. And I'm going to go to Mr. Haskin and ask, what are the FAA requirements for ADSB out? When were they enacted and where do they apply?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so the ADSB requirements came into effect January of 2020, and they apply in various airspaces. I don't know how much detail you're looking for, but they unfortunately get rather complex about the different airspaces we require it. But for instance, certainly in Class B airspace, which is the focus of this hearing, it is a requirement.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to go back to Dr. Kunze, and can you talk about, you introduced kind of ADSB, and one of the most basic levels of how ADSB can be used is the ADSB Traffic Awareness System, or ATAS.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that, and what is it, and how does it work?
Yeah, so one of the benefits of ADSB in is that it allows for a significant improvement in collision avoidance performance, collision avoidance system design. And there's a figure in Exhibit 2-Air-U, uniform, page 2, that provides the larger context for collision avoidance systems, if we would be able to pull that up. When we talk about collision avoidance or conflict management more generally, there's an international framework that exists where and this is harmonized via ICAO. So this is a global framework that is used when it comes to keeping aircraft apart from each other. So this is the same in Europe, in Asia, in the United States. It's harmonized via ICAO, the UN body by the name of International Civil Aviation Organization. And it consists of 3 layers. The first layer is meant to keep aircraft apart by structuring the airspace and routes in a way that is inherently safe. That's the first layer. This is not something that really manifests during the flight itself, but it's something that happens primarily before the flight. The second layer is ATC separation or remain well clear actions by the pilot during the flight. We talked about this a lot yesterday, so our conflict probe, our air traffic control separation support is that middle layer. And then the last layer is the collision avoidance layer. So this is now the pilot, where the middle layer is air traffic control. The last layer is legally, squarely the responsibility of the pilot. And as Dr. Kasner said, this last layer is hard for the pilot to do just by vision. The see and avoid requirement there is hard. And so over the years, we've developed a large number of systems that support the pilot in the task of the visual acquisition or the avoidance of other aircraft. And those systems, they fall into 2 categories. We already mentioned them. The first category is a traffic alerting system. So this provides alerts to the pilot on where the aircraft is. It's usually what we call a yellow level alert. So it's a caution, which requires immediate attention by the pilot, but the pilot still needs to determine whether an action is actually necessary. And then the second category of systems is a collision avoidance system, which also provides an escape maneuver. So those are usually red level alerts, immediate attention by the pilot, immediate action by the pilot. And as I mentioned, it's directive. So it tells the pilot how to avoid a hazard or a conflict in midair. So this existed all before the introduction of ADSB. And it used, a lot of the sensors that are used in these systems are effectively 1980s technology. So they ping, they interrogate other aircraft, they wait for a reply, they time how long that takes, that gives you an estimate of range. You watch range over time and you can tell whether the aircraft is getting closer or not. Mind you, when you have range, you don't know if the aircraft is in front of you or behind you or wherever, you just have range. You have range rate by watching it over time. And in the reply from the aircraft, you get altitude. So you have three parameters: range, range rate, and altitude. And that's the information you have to decide whether you're going to avoid or try to do something about this aircraft in your vicinity. And this is where actually a lot of these systems struggle, because what you do when you design these types of systems, when you have that limited amount of information, you have to have fairly large protection values around the aircraft, because you don't really know where they are. And so these systems work well in an en route environment where aircraft are naturally far apart. But as aircraft get closer to each other in a terminal environment, these systems tend to have fairly large rates of undesirable alerts. They alert on aircraft that you know they are there, or air traffic control is providing separation, so you don't really want to hear alerts continuously as you get closer and closer to the airport. And this is where the introduction of ADSB really provides a significant improvement. You go from this very large volume around other aircraft to a very small, constrained environment where you now know latitude and longitude. Rather than a relative measurement, I have an absolute measurement. I know latitude, longitude, I know velocity, I know geometric altitude, I know pressure altitude, I know type of aircraft, I know direction because I know the heading of the aircraft. So now all of a sudden we have an exquisite set of data that allows us to do alerting in ways that before we weren't able to do. And so that allowed us, and this was the genesis of the TCAS program, the Airborne Traffic Alerting System program. I was a grad student at the time at MIT, and the FAA, realizing this opportunity, came to MIT and asked if we would be willing to help them in the development of this first ADSB-based collision alerting system. So to be clear, this is that first category. This is a traffic alerting system, not an avoidance system, a traffic alerting system. And so we started out with looking at the 10 years prior, all the midair collisions that had happened, to understand the dynamics, to understand the risk factors that actually lead to midair collisions. In fact, if you pull up slide probably 3 on that same exhibit, the high-level results of how midair collisions happened. It was 112 NTSB reports that we reviewed for this. You can see on the left where the midair collisions actually happen, and much to my surprise, at least initially, almost 2/3 of midair collisions happen in the immediate vicinity of the airport, and then about the last third is away from the airport. And the geometry between those collisions is oftentimes aircraft going in the same direction. And so this was very informative because it allowed us to identify geometries that mattered from a design perspective in this ATAS system, and ultimately derive system requirements that drove the design for how to do collision alerting in the airport environment, where existing collision alerting systems at the time just had limited performance. And so from there, we went, did a large amount of flight tests. We did algorithm system development. In fact, the FAA's Tech Center helped us to fly helicopters. We did encounters between helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft, two fixed-wing aircraft approaching the same runway, small airplanes, fast airplanes, big airplanes, all the full trade space. That ultimately resulted in an RTCA standard. So this has been standardized. It has been harmonized with Europe. We have certified these systems, built them. There are thousands of them in the field. And as far as we know, there's currently There hasn't been any one of those systems that has been involved in a midair collision, as far as we can tell, ever since we introduced this. And so the introduction of TCAS, the air traffic alerting system, has fixed that hole that we had in collision avoidance systems, where they had less performance in the terminal environment. We're still working on the TCAS version, which is the collision avoidance, the directive, the Category 2 system. That's in work, but the TCAS system was finished on an FAA program about 10 years ago.
Great, thank you very much. And with that introduction, I'm gonna turn it over to Captain McKinney, and he's going to talk about what the Army helicopter had on their aircraft.
Yes, that's correct. I'm going to focus on the traffic information technology available to the helicopter crew. So this question will be for Mr. Van Vechten, please. What types of traffic alerting systems were available to the helicopter crew?
Organic to the helicopter, none.
Okay. But they did have a electronic flight bag?
So electronic flight bag would include a personal electronic device such as an iPad, and that alone does not provide any type of traffic collision avoidance. It must be paired with another external device such as a Stratus.
Okay, and we know that the 12th Battalion had Stratus available to the air crews.
Yes, they were available.
Right, and we do believe they had a Stratus on board. Could you just describe all the capabilities of an electronic flight bag?
Sure. The electronic flight bag is primarily used as a digital flight information publication bag. So all of our publications that are required for flight, we can use it for a digital moving map. So in the Lima, where there's not organic multifunctional displays or MFDs with a moving map, we can use it for that. But it does have its limitations as well. We cannot use it for a primary means of navigation. It can assist, but it's not supposed to be primarily used for situational awareness. It's not to be referenced by the pilot on the controls. And it does have its limitations. So I brought one with me. If you can kind of see it, it kind of glares. I don't know if you can see it in the light. But one of the major limitations, especially while flying goggles and NVGs, it obviously produces light because it's lit up as a screen, and that can reflect off the pilot's windscreen and prevent you from actually being able to see outside.
Oh, that's interesting. Does each pilot carry a iPad EFB with them?
At least 2 are on each flight.
Okay. How about the crew chief?
Sometimes. If I'm doing an instrument flight where I don't necessarily need my iPad in flight as much, we may pass one back. So while the pilot on the controls is flying, maintaining altitude, heading and airspeed, we will give the iPad to the crew chief in the back that can assist with airspace surveillance. And at altitude, we probably would have an ADSB in via the Stratus device.
Right. And you're not required to have the traffic or map display up all the time, right? You could have other types of information on the iPad being displayed when you're flying, such as airport a reference or approach plate or something like that.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. But the ForeFlight does, and ForeFlight is the electronic flight bag that the Army uses.
No, it's not required to use a specific application. ForeFlight typically is the go-to application, though.
Okay, and the 12th Battalion was using ForeFlight on their iPads?
Yes, they were. They had a battalion ForeFlight account.
That's right. Okay. So if the flight crew had ForeFlight and the map was displayed, would that display provide any type of traffic awareness or alerting?
If it was paired to a Stratus device, you may see ADSB in data on your iPad via the icons.
Mm-hmm. And do air crews typically use it as a primary source of traffic identification?
No, we're not supposed to use that. It's prohibited from using as primary source of airspace deconfliction.
Okay. And typically, where do the pilot or co-pilot air crew keep the iPad during flight?
If it's being utilized, it's usually strapped to either the left or the right leg. It can be stowed in the door map pocket. It can be stored there. It can be in your pubs bag, which would be down by your side where it's readily available. We're not supposed to place it on the center console or have it unsecured or unstowed at any time. So usually the pilot on the controls would hit the button to turn off the screen so that it's not blinding you. And then if the pilot not on the controls needed it, they would be referencing it from one of their legs.
Okay. And you maybe covered this a little bit, but are there challenges and limitations using this equipment for traffic awareness and identification?
Well, yes, particularly while on the DC Helo routes, it's advised not to use it because we're flying VFR, so pilots' eyes should primarily be outside, especially when you're at low level, especially when you're under night vision goggles.
Mm-hmm. And the iPad, would that be even part of the scan for the flying pilot?
No, it's for the flying pilot, absolutely not. It says shall not be referenced by the pilot on the controls.
Okay. And in your experience, how often have you noticed a for-flight traffic alert on the iPad?
Yes, we talked about this. So rarely, almost never. It happened once coming off of Baltimore, passing by Martin State. I got the little icon turn red, and it kind of surprised me, so I took a screenshot of it, and that's what I sent you because I had never seen that before.
Right. And for something like that, would you report that to the safety officer of your unit?
No, I was in comms with Martin State. They told me about the aircraft. I saw it. I think it got within 600 feet of going below me. I was on the helicopter route going from Baltimore to Aberdeen Proving Ground, and they were on the final approach course for the runway into Martin State. So we were all talking to tower. I was aware of them, and it wasn't unsafe. It was, I think, like I said, 600 feet below me.
Okay, thank you. And if you're using ForeFlight and you have a different page up, not the map, would you get a traffic alert on that page?
No, I don't believe so.
We talked a little bit about the UH-60 Mike model, so that's quite a bit different than the 60 Lima model. Does the UH-60 Mike model have any type of traffic awareness technology on board?
So the Mike does. There are 6 of the 8 Mike models at Fort Belvoir that are equipped with TCAS. I had never used it. It's not in the operator's manual. I've never been trained on it. I recently started talking to pilots, and they are starting to use it now. But other than those 6 Black Hawks, in my 22-plus years of flying the 60, I've never seen TCAS.
Okay, so those 6, that's an additional equipment that's been installed on those particular aircraft. It's not fleet-wide, is that correct?
That's correct, and they have an AWR specific to those 6 tail numbers.
Okay, and the pilots flying those, are they being trained on that TCAS system?
When I was there, no, we did not turn it on. We did not utilize it. It was not in our operator's manual.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions. Captain Stone.
Thank you. I'm going to shift gears slightly to air carrier operations, and I'm going to go to Captain Surridge. We've been talking about ADSB-in and the ADSB-in displays, and what I'd like you to do is to talk a little bit about the difference, because the basic traffic alert and collision avoidance system, or TCAS, has a traffic display. What makes the display that you are pioneering on your Airbus fleet different from the standard TCAS display?
Sure. If we could pull up Exhibit 2 Air Whiskey. And I think that was the slide.
That was it.
Stand by. Thank you. So in this slide right here, you can see the differences between what we call a navigational display that has TCAS on the left, and on the right, what we call this the aircraft guidance display. And between the two, there's differences. On the TCAS, you don't get directionality, so the arrows that you see on this screen are not the direction of the aircraft. It is just the fact that it's either climbing or descending. I can't tell you what direction those aircraft are going. But if I look on the right side, I can see the directionality of my aircraft in relationship to the directionality of the aircraft around me. I can see the range. In this case, it's at 2.5. And then I can also see that the flight ID. So I can positively identify the aircraft that are around me with the flight ID, plus altitude to my altitude relational.
So let me follow up with, how would you contrast visually acquiring a target with your guidance display versus a standard TCAS display?
Well, this aircraft guidance display gives me instant information about the aircraft around me so that I can make different decisions. In this case, had the helicopter had this in front in their forward view and able to use this, and had the controller given the clearance pass behind 5342. If 5342 was up there, I could have positively identified 5342, and the helicopter would have known at that point that it was going directly towards that aircraft and needed to do a slight left turn.
And you could say the same thing for the aircraft. If they had this display, they would instantly know that the traffic was headed straight for them, as opposed to out in front of them somewhere. Is that?
So this is not a traffic collision avoidance tool like Dr. Kunze had talked about. This is more in the realm of helping the controller find where or helping the controller give clearances, and with those clearances, the pilots can make better decisions. So in this case, for the PSA aircraft, it was on a short final. Their attention would have been outside of the aircraft, looking at the runway. And so in this case, at that point in time, I would not consider this a tool that would effectively avoid a collision, just given the facts of this collision.
Okay, let's shift gears again a little bit to the last couple of days. We've been talking a lot about time-based flow management and how that works with air traffic control. And can you describe, as it is today, the pilot's role in time-based flow management?
Sure. Pretty much a pilot's role is nothing. We don't do anything when it comes to that.
Okay, so basically you're going to get controller instructions to maintain a speed or fly heading if you need to do a path stretch or something like that. So basically you're not involved in traffic flow management at all in today's world. And so my next question is, with the system that you have on your aircraft, do you have the ability to be a participant in the traffic flow management system, and how do you do that? How could it work?
Correct. And if you pull up the same exhibit, slide 5, one more. Perfect. So this is the beauty of this technology, and that is that today a pilot is pretty much blind to their surroundings and to what's going on, and the controller leads them by the hand and tells them what to do, and the pilot does it. In this system, now the pilot becomes engaged with what the controller actually wants, and because of that, you can achieve spacing goals that you cannot achieve with TBFM alone. So if you look at the slides on the left, you'll see the top slide, it says 4 non-IM aircraft. Those aircraft were coming into Phoenix, Arizona on the trial that we performed between American and the FAA. And you can see the spacing in those aircraft. And then if you go to the second slide and you look on the left side, you can see those 3 aircraft as they went down the Eagle arrival. And their spacing is 5.8, 7.6, 6.4. If you go to the other on the slide 2 still, on the right-hand side, you'll see those are 4 IM aircraft that are just starting to get lined up. Same controller working all of those aircraft.
And can you tell us what IM is?
I'm sorry about that. Interval management is IM. On the third slide, you'll see that those IM, interval management aircraft, the spacing of those aircraft is much more consistent, and it leads to better predictable spacing within the NAS. This is the extent of our trial, and how far we were able to get. Unfortunately, the funding for that trial has been discontinued, and we were not able to continue the research that we were doing. And so the next step would be that we integrate TBFM sequencing so that the aircraft would have the necessary spacing. So when they enter the terminal area, the controller now, we could actually set it up where we would have breaks in this traffic so that they can sequence another class stream in the terminal area. So what we're trying to do with this technology is take the actual workload and start to bring it out into the en route part of the flight where it's not as busy, and setting up the terminal controller so that their job is easier, the sequencing in that airspace.
Great. On the right part of the display, you've got the guidance display. So how does the pilot maintain the spacing that air traffic control is assigning?
It's fairly simple. I've done quite a few of these over the last couple of years, and all I do is I follow that commanded speed. So that 210, that's all I have to do. So I go into, for my aircraft, it's called the FCU. I reach up, I select 210, and I'm done.
Okay, very good. And so your trial basically ended at the approach control boundary of the TRACON boundary, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to extend this a little bit further in the future. Is there an end state to this technology that we can run the airspace in a different way to achieve, a better, safer, more efficient spacing?
Yes, there absolutely is, and that's called flight interval management. And as we start to develop these technologies, again, it has the ability to look out hundreds of miles around the airport as flights are coming into this airport, and it has the ability to sequence and space these aircraft in such a way that what we call, we achieve very high RNAV conformances. You can only achieve this type of spacing and sequencing with a flight system that is looking at the winds on our aircraft. As you know, we have laser gyros, and they are able to give us exact speed information, and that information then is ingested into the algorithms in the box to produce the proper command speed.
And my last question on this, it's the FAA is about to invest a large amount of money in upgrading their infrastructure, very appropriately, I think. Do you know, do their future plans include putting a role for the aircraft in this traffic flow management arena, or do you know if they are planning to upgrade and continue operating the system as is?
I think we're very, we're just starting to look at the funding, and I have not been told that any of the funding will be directed towards this, but I'm hopeful that it will be.
Okay. Appreciate that. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Flynn, who's going to talk a little bit about TCAS systems.
Hi. Mr. Haskins, can you tell us what are the current requirements for collision avoidance systems?
Yes. So I'll start with the transponder. The transponder is a fundamental part of the collision avoidance system, and that is required really in the same airspace as ADSB is required. And so for the purposes of this, I'll say it's required for all aircraft in Class B airspace. The actual collision avoidance systems themselves are not airspace dependent, but rather what operation you're conducting, what part you're conducting your operation under. So for Part 121, 125, and 129 aircraft, the TCAS 2 requirements are basically the same, and what they are is that if you have a turbine-powered airplane of more than 33,000 pounds maximum certificated takeoff weight, you have basically three methods of compliance to the TCAS rule. The first is having a TCAS 2 system that's version 7.0 or later. The second is we allow a TCAS 2 system of 6.04 if it was installed in your airplane before May 1st, 2003. And then the third is you can have a collision avoidance system that's capable of coordinating with units that are 6.04 capable.
Can you describe the differences between the 6.4 and the 7.1, 7.2?
So basically the three versions of TCAS are 6.04, 7.0, and 7.1. Different capabilities were added over time. I think some of my other colleagues, Mr. Suki or Dr. Olson, can probably speak to the differences in the development of those different versions better than I could.
Yes. 604 Alpha, the first iteration of collision avoidance introduced in the early 90s. Great performance, but as you roll out technology and get some experience with it, you realize there are some tweaks and modifications needed for extending from 604 Alpha to 7. Several change proposals were introduced. I mean, there were hundreds introduced into version 7, specifically to deal with nuisance alerting, a matter that we've been talking about a lot lately. So what really aided in 7 was the introduction of sense reversal logic, the introduction of horizontal misdistance filter, and then lastly, a real big one was the introduction of RVSM airspace and the tolerances associated with alerting at higher levels. And then when we go from 7 to 7.1, there were two changes, primary changes, specifically dealing with the Uberling incident where the sense reversal logic was extended for, there's a sort of relationship between paired aircraft to TCAS equipped aircraft. There was a reversal logic for the master aircraft. There were modifications to the slave reversal logic, and then also to the adjust vertical speed adjust enunciations where it required a reduction in vertical speed. We removed that to where it was just a simple level off zero command.
Thank you. Next question is for Mr. Flanagan. What are the Army requirements for collision avoidance systems?
So currently we don't have requirements on aircraft, but we have emerging operational needs because of the airspace we operate in that's inherently congested, low altitude, and that requires us to look at the emerging ACAS-X Aircraft Collision Avoidance System X software, which we're evaluating.
And I guess Mr. Olson or Mr. Sushi, are there differences in TCAS for a helicopter versus an airplane?
Certainly. So today, helicopters are equipping with TCAS 2. And there are no modifications to TCAS 2 for helicopters. Now, typically, they do not meet the vertical climb requirements of 1,500 feet per minute. They probably also may not be able to achieve the anticipated G-loading during the response. And it's also the case that many helicopter operations occur below 1,000 feet AGL, and as we'll discuss later in this panel, I'm sure TCAS resolution advisories are inhibited below roughly 1,000 feet AGL. It also does not consider terrain or obstructions. So the FAA, and I believe that Mr. Suki will talk about this later, is developing ACAS-XR, as mentioned by the Army, but as specifically being designed for rotorcraft
to operate and provide resolution advisories below 1,000 feet AGL, to consider terrain obstructions when generating those maneuver guidance, and also to provide horizontal maneuvers in addition to vertical maneuvers to accommodate the lower vertical rate and be specifically tuned for that operational environment.
Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Captain Stone.
Thank you, and I'm going to continue with you, Dr. Olson. Dr. Kunze actually gave a very good explanation of kind of the differences between the situational awareness system and ATAS and collision avoidance system. And but I'd like to just have you go over really quickly how does the collision avoidance system, the current collision avoidance system, TCAS, work?
Certainly. So the existing TCAS system works primarily by first developing a picture of where the other aircraft nearby, we call that surveillance. So it sends an interrogation to the transponder on nearby aircraft, much like a toll transponder in your car, and those aircraft respond with our altitude. And based on, as Dr. Kunze described, the time of arrival, you can generate range and range rate. TCAS 2 also has a directional antenna, so you can estimate bearing nominally to plus or minus 9 degrees. And TCAS has very extensive heuristic logic, so if-then rules. If this happens, then the system should do that. It also has what we call trackers to take that information and not just say it's a bunch of dots, but to connect those dots into a track. So understanding that this is one aircraft operating. And based on those heuristic rules, based on the altitude of the aircraft, either above ground altitude or MSL, mean sea level altitude, it adjusts its alerting sensitivity, so how far away those aircraft are going to be. And it generates either traffic advisories, TAs, and this is based on a linear projection of my own ship trajectory as well as that other aircraft. And I should say this cycle of interrogation and replies is once per second. So every second it updates the picture, it uses those rules to say, should I issue an alert or should I not? The first level of alerting is a caution alert. So that alert would tell the pilot the intended function is to have the pilot visually acquire the other traffic, to look out the window based on the traffic display, and also to prepare to respond. So quite often air carrier type aircraft, and I would also say that business jet aircraft, even though they're not required, as Mr. Haskins said, to equip, almost all of them have for insurance reasons. So they would perhaps disengage the autopilot or at least be prepared to do that to respond to the resolution advisory. If the range and range rate meet certain thresholds, then TCAS would see the need to generate a resolution advisory that would tell pilots to climb or descend, or to stop climbing or descending to mitigate that potential mid-air collision. And in doing so, TCAS would first determine should the aircraft move in an upward direction, or should the own aircraft maneuver in a downward direction. And then once it decides that, it decides whether or not, or the strength of that maneuver should be it to simply tell pilots to monitor their vertical speed, that is not to change their vertical profile or not to descend or climb as the case might be. It might be that level off RA that Mr. Suki talked about, or in the older versions it would tell them to reduce their vertical rate, or it might tell them to climb or descend. And as the maneuver continues, TCAS continues to update itself once a second, and it can change its mind. It can reverse the direction it tells the pilot to perform that escape maneuver. So for example, it could, if the aircraft is the pilot's being instructed to climb, it could reverse one time into a descend based on the evolving situation. When the aircraft have passed each other, past the closest point of approach, TCAS would enunciate clear of conflict to the flight crew, which would terminate the RA, the resolution advisory, and that's the basic operation. I guess one other important note is that if both aircraft have TCAS installed, those maneuvers are coordinated between the two aircraft. So one aircraft you think is the classic hallway problem, you're approaching somebody in the hallway, you both maneuver, you don't want that with aircraft. So One will pick going up, the other will pick going in the downward direction, or be instructed actually to go in the downward direction. Are there further questions?
No, that was a good explanation, basic explanation of how TCAS works, so that's good. One of the issues that we talked about earlier was the prevalence of non-pertinent alerts or nuisance alerts. And could you describe, Dr. Olson, what is a nuisance alert?
I would say that this is a very difficult topic, both with the pilot community and the design community, to precisely define a nuisance alert. It would be one that is not desired by the flight crew, although that being said, quite often the flight crew is not aware of the criticality of the situation or the maneuver of the other aircraft. So really, post hoc, you can determine whether the alert would have been necessary or not. Operational experience shows that many, up to half of the resolution advisories are caused by 500-foot IFR, instrument flight rules, or VFR, visual flight rules separation. They're separated by 500 feet vertically in the National Airspace System. And that's standard, that's deemed safe. TCAS vertical alerting criteria is 650 feet at lower altitude, so every time a TCAS-equipped aircraft comes within closer proximity of a visual flight rules aircraft that's operating 500 feet below, a resolution advisory will be generated. It's also the case that many airports have what we call parallel runways. This is not the case at DCA as in this accident, but for example, if you've flown into San Francisco or Denver or Atlanta or Chicago, there are runways in the same direction, sometimes with fairly low levels of separation that will be inside of TCAS alerting criteria, which would generate alerts. So at San Francisco, for example, where the runways are approximately 750 feet horizontally separated, that's well within the TCAS alerting thresholds, generating alerts that are unwanted by the pilots. But quite often the pilot is not aware at the time whether it's a nuisance RA or not.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to transition briefly to Dr. Kasner. What is the effect of a high rate of nuisance alerts as far as, the human ability to respond to an alert?
Well, we become desensitized to the alert. The alert
would be considered nuisance alerts or could be considered nuisance alerts?
I could compare with the system that we've produced recently within our TCA, a TCAS-2 replacement. It's called ACAS XA, Airborne Collision Avoidance System XA, and its primary objective was to reduce so-called nuisance alerts and specifically tackle issues such as IFR, VFR interactions, as well as the 1,000-foot level off with an aircraft traversing above. Those are some primary use cases of what we typically hear of as nuisance alerts. And as far as the performance of ACAS XA versus that of TCAS-2, XA has reduced the number of alerts by over 65%. So a lot of these alerts would be the monitor vertical speed or your adjust vertical speed enunciations. But within that class of 65%, the deviation causing alerts, the climbs and descends, they were reduced by 35% with ACAS XA, meanwhile maintaining safety and actually improving safety by 20%.